never planned to spend New Year's Eve in rural Kentucky, but life has a way of pushing you into places you do not think twice about until later. At the time, it felt normal, quiet, even. Looking back now, I realize that quiet was the first warning. This happened a few years ago. I was visiting my aunt who lived outside a small town in eastern Kentucky. Her house sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by bare trees and rolling hills. In winter, everything there felt bigger and emptier. The sky seemed wider, and the nights felt heavier, like they pressed down on you. New Year's Eve had always been loud and crowded for me before that. Fireworks, traffic, people yelling countdowns. That year was different. My aunt was older and did not care much for celebrations. She went to bed early, as she always did, and told me to lock the doors before midnight. I remember laughing and saying I would. Around 10:30 that night, I was sitting in the living room watching television. The signal was weak, so the picture kept freezing. Outside, the wind moved slowly through the trees. Every now and then, a branch scraped against the side of the house. It was not scary yet, just lonely. I checked my phone, but there was barely any service. One bar, sometimes none. Messages took forever to send, and videos would not load at all. I thought about driving into town, but it was at least 20 minutes away, and the roads were narrow and dark. I decided to stay put. At about 11:15, I heard what sounded like a distant firework, just one low pop far away. It surprised me because the nearest neighbors were miles apart. I brushed it off, thinking someone was welcoming the new year early. Then it happened again. Another pop, closer this time. I muted the television and listened. The house creaked like old houses do, settling into the cold. The sound did not repeat, but the silence afterward felt thick. I remember feeling oddly watched, even though I was alone in a locked house in the middle of nowhere. I stood up and checked the front door. It was locked. The back door too. I pulled the curtains aside and looked out the front window. The yard was covered in thin snow, glowing faintly under the moon. No cars, no lights, nothing moving. That was when I noticed footprints. They started near the edge of the road and led toward the house. The snow had fallen earlier that evening, and these prints were fresh. They were slow and uneven, like whoever made them had been standing around for a while. I told myself it was probably a neighbor walking by. That thought did not make much sense, but it was easier than the alternative. At 11:45, my phone buzzed. For a moment, I felt relief. Then I saw the message. It was from an unknown number. It simply said, "You hear them too?" I stared at the screen, my heart beating faster, the room suddenly feeling much smaller than it had a few minutes before. I read the message again, slowly. "You hear them too?" I did not reply right away. My first thought was that it had to be a joke or a wrong number. Still, my chest felt tight, like my body knew something my mind was trying to ignore. I typed back, asking who it was. The message sat there for a long time before it finally showed as sent. The phone signal faded in and out, like it could disappear at any moment. While I waited, I walked back to the window and looked at the snow again. The footprints were clearer now that my eyes had adjusted. They did not go past the house. They stopped a few feet from the front steps, as if the person had just stood there facing the door. I stepped away from the window and turned on every light in the living room. It made me feel a little better, even though I knew lights did not really protect anyone. I lowered my voice when I spoke, even though I was alone. That still bothers me when I think about it. My phone buzzed again. "Didn't mean to scare you," the message said. "I'm on the road, same road as you." I felt cold all of a sudden. I asked how they knew where I was. The response came quicker this time. "Only house with lights on," it said. "Been quiet all night. Too quiet." I asked what they meant by them. There was a long pause. During that time, I noticed something else outside. The footprints looked deeper, like more weight had pressed into the snow since I last checked. I did not see anyone, but the marks were not the same as before. When the reply finally came, my stomach dropped. "They stand out there every New Year," the message read. "Don't come close. Don't speak to them." I wanted to laugh it off, but nothing about this felt funny. I asked who they were, but the phone showed no signal again. I tried walking around the room, holding the phone up, hoping for a bar to appear. From somewhere outside, I heard slow movement through the snow. Not fast, not rushed, just steady, like someone taking their time. I backed away from the windows and sat on the couch, staring at the front door. Midnight was getting closer. I could feel it, like the air was changing. Then the television screen flickered on its own, even though I had turned it off. The screen stayed dark, but the sound came through. It was not music or voices. It was more like a low hum, stretching out and filling the room. My phone buzzed one last time. "Whatever you do," the message said, "don't let them know you're awake." My eyes moved to the front window again, and that was when I realized the footprints were now right up against the steps. I stayed frozen on the couch, barely breathing. The lights were still on, and suddenly I regretted that. The house felt too visible, like it was announcing that someone was awake inside. I reached for the lamp beside me and turned it off, then another, until only the faint glow from the kitchen remained. The dark made me nervous, but it felt safer than being fully lit up. Outside, the movement stopped. That was worse somehow. At least when something is moving, you can pretend it will pass by. When it stops, it feels like a decision has been made. My phone had no signal again. I kept checking it anyway, like that would change something. Midnight was only minutes away. I could feel the time passing, slow and heavy. The air inside the house felt thicker, harder to breathe. I heard my aunt shift in her bedroom down the hall. She coughed once and went quiet again. I thought about waking her, but something told me not to. I cannot explain it well, but it felt like attention itself was dangerous. Like being noticed was the real problem. I slowly stood up and moved toward the hallway. Every step felt louder than it should have, even though I was careful. I paused near the front window and looked out again, just for a second. There were more footprints now, not just one set. Several, overlapping and uneven, all facing the house. None of them moved away. Whoever or whatever made them had been standing there for a while. I pulled back from the window, my heart beating so hard I thought I might feel it in my throat. The low sound from the television was still there, even though the screen was dark. It reminded me of wind moving through a tunnel, constant and dull. Then something changed. The sound outside did not come closer, but it felt nearer somehow, like pressure building. The house creaked softly, not in a normal way, but like it was reacting to the cold air pressing against it. My phone suddenly lit up in my hand. One bar of service appeared, then two. A new message came through. "It's almost time," it said. "They don't like the old year ending." I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. My mind kept reaching for logic, but none of it fit. I typed back, asking what happens at midnight. The reply came almost immediately. "They check who is still here." I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:59. The low sound from the television stopped. The silence that replaced it felt wrong, like the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, the footprints did not move, but I felt certain that whatever stood there was aware of the time. The clock changed. Midnight. At that exact moment, every light in the house went out. The darkness was complete. Not the kind where you can still make out shapes, but the kind that feels thick, like it fills your eyes. I stood there, not moving, afraid that even shifting my weight would somehow give me away. Outside, the snow reflected just enough moonlight that I could still see faint outlines through the window. The footprints were still there. They had not changed position, but I had the strong feeling that something had changed in them. Like they were no longer just marks in the snow, but proof that something was waiting. I did not hear celebration sounds. No distant cheers, no fireworks, no signs that anyone else was welcoming the new year. It felt like time had stopped just for that stretch of road in that old house. My phone vibrated weakly in my hand. The screen lit up, then dimmed again, fighting to stay on. One final message came through. "Stay still," it said. "They listen for movement. They watch for light. They wait to see who reacts." I leaned against the wall, slowly lowering myself to the floor. My legs felt shaky, like they might give out on their own. I kept my breathing shallow and quiet, counting seconds in my head because I was too scared to look at the clock again. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. It was hard to tell. Eventually, the pressure in the air began to ease. It was subtle, like a storm moving farther away rather than ending all at once. Then, very slowly, the house lights came back on. One by one, Not all at the same time, just enough to remind me that the power had never truly gone out. I waited longer before standing. When I finally looked outside again, the footprints were gone. The snow was smooth and untouched, like no one had ever been there at all. The road was empty too. My phone had no signal. The unknown number never sent another message, and when I tried replying later, it failed every time. In the morning, I told my aunt I had a bad night and barely slept. She nodded and said, New Year's Eve was always strange out there. When I asked her what she meant, she just said some places notice time more than people think. I left Kentucky the next day. I have never gone back for New Year's Eve, and I never stay awake past midnight anymore if I am somewhere quiet. Some years, when the house is still and the world feels paused, I swear I can feel that same pressure in the air, like something is checking to see who is still paying attention. Story 2. This happened on December 31st, a few years back. I was 27 at the time and living alone in a small rental house outside a town that barely showed up on maps. It was one of those places where everyone waves, even if they do not know your name. My house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, with woods on 3 sides and an old tobacco field behind it. No close neighbors. The nearest house was maybe half a mile away. I had planned a quiet New Year's Eve. No parties, no loud crowds, just me, some leftover chili, and the television. I had worked that morning and was tired. Around 6 in the evening, the sky turned that flat winter gray that Kentucky gets, and the air felt heavy, like snow might come later. By 7, it was fully dark. I locked my doors like I always did, more out of habit than fear. I remember checking my phone and seeing messages from friends asking what my plans were. I told them I was staying in. They joked that I was getting old. I laughed and put my phone down. Around 8:30, the power flickered. It did not go out, just dimmed for a second. That was not unusual either. Wind picked up outside, brushing against the house. I turned the volume up on the television and kept eating. At 9, I noticed how quiet everything had become. No wind, no insects. Even the dogs I usually heard barking in the distance were silent. It felt strange, but I did not think much of it at first. I told myself it was just the cold settling in. Then I heard a sound outside. It was faint, and at first I thought it was the old house shifting. But it came again, a slow crunch like boots on gravel. I muted the television and listened. The sound stopped. I waited a few seconds, feeling a little silly for being nervous. After all, it was New Year's Eve. Maybe someone was walking home or taking a shortcut. I unmuted the television. A few minutes later, the sound came back. Closer this time, very slow. Each step spaced out, like whoever it was did not want to be heard. My stomach tightened. Nobody walked down my road at night, especially in winter. There was nowhere to walk to. I stood up and went to the front window, careful not to turn on any lights. I moved the curtain just enough to look out. The road was empty. My porch light was off, and the darkness felt thick like it pressed against the glass. That was when I noticed something else. My car door was open. I was sure I had locked it. I always did. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. That uneasy feeling settled deeper in my chest, slow and heavy. Then, very softly, I heard someone knock on my front door. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 slow knocks. I did not move. I barely breathed. Who knocks like that on New Year's Eve out here, this late? I stayed frozen, hoping whoever it was would leave. Instead, the knocking came again. Even slower this time. I stood there in the living room, staring at the door like it might suddenly explain itself. My heart was beating fast, but my body felt stiff, like I was afraid even a small move would give me away. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. The sound came again. 3 slow, careful sounds against the front door. Whoever was outside was being very gentle, almost polite. That made it worse somehow. If it were loud or angry, I might have known how to react. This felt planned. I did not answer. I did not speak. I just waited. After a moment, the sound stopped. I counted in my head. 10 seconds, 20, 30, nothing. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. Maybe they thought no one was home. Maybe they would leave. Then I heard footsteps again. This time moving along the porch. Slow and steady. I followed the sound as it moved past the front of the house toward the side window near my kitchen. I backed away without thinking, keeping to the shadows. I told myself not to look. Every scary story starts with someone looking, but my body did not listen. I moved toward the kitchen window, staying low, and gently lifted the corner of the blind just enough to see outside. There was a person standing near the window. They were facing the glass, but their head was slightly turned, like they were listening. I could not see their face clearly, only the shape of it. They were tall, wearing a dark jacket, hands down by their sides. They did not move at all. We stayed like that for what felt like a long time. Me inside, barely breathing. Them outside, completely still. I had the strong feeling that if I made any sound, they would look right at me. Suddenly, they stepped back and moved out of view. I heard footsteps heading toward the back of the house, toward the old tobacco field. I waited until the sound faded, then ran quietly to the back window. The field was empty. No person, no movement, just frozen dirt and dead plants under the pale moonlight. I felt confused and scared at the same time. If they left, where did they go? There was nowhere to hide out there. My phone buzzed suddenly, making me jump. It was almost midnight. A friend sent a message wishing me a happy new year. My hands shook as I typed back. I did not mention what was happening. I did not want to sound dramatic. I checked the time again, 11:58. That was when the power went out completely. The house fell into darkness. The heater shut off. The silence felt heavy, like the air itself stopped moving. I stood there, phone light on, heart pounding, when I heard footsteps again. This time, they were inside the house. I froze where I stood. The phone light shook in my hand, casting weak shadows on the walls. I listened closely, trying to understand what I was hearing. Slow steps moved across the floor somewhere near the living room. Not rushed, not loud, just calm, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. My first thought was that I was imagining it. Fear can do that. I told myself the house was old, that maybe it was settling after the power shut off. But the steps changed direction. They moved closer to the hallway that led to my bedroom. That is when I knew it was real. I felt sick to my stomach. My mouth went dry. I backed into the kitchen, holding my breath, trying to think clearly. I had no weapon, nothing to protect myself with. My keys were on the counter, but my car was outside, and whoever opened it earlier might still be near. The steps stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. It felt like the house was waiting, like it was listening with me. I slowly lowered myself behind the kitchen table, keeping the phone light pointed at the floor. I did not want to give away my position. My heart was beating so hard I worried it could be heard across the room. Then I heard a soft sound from the hallway. Not steps, something else, like fabric brushing against the wall. Very slow, very close. I closed my eyes for a moment and prayed, not even knowing what for. I just wanted the night to end. I wanted midnight to pass so badly, like that would somehow make things better. My phone vibrated again. Midnight, the new year had started. At that exact moment, the sound in the hallway stopped completely. No movement, no breathing, nothing. I waited, counting seconds again, my whole body shaking. Then, without warning, the back door opened. I heard the door move, the cold air rushing in, filling the house. Footsteps moved away, heading outside. I stayed hidden for a long time, too scared to move. When I finally stood up and checked the house, every door was closed again. Nothing was missing. Nothing was damaged. My car door was shut too, just like it had never been opened. The power came back on around 1 a.m. I did not sleep that night. The next day, I found muddy footprints in the field behind my house. They led toward the woods and stopped suddenly, like the person had vanished. I moved out a month later. I still spend New Year's Eve indoors, with all the lights on. Even after I moved out, the feeling followed me. I told myself it was just stress, that my mind had filled in gaps during a quiet night. But deep down, I knew something about that night was wrong in a way I could not explain away. I moved closer to town, into an apartment with neighbors on all sides. People laughed in the hallways. Cars came and went at all hours. It should have felt safer, and in some ways it did. But when December came around again, that same heavy feeling returned. I tried talking about it once, just casually, like you do when telling a strange story. Most people brushed it off. A few joked that someone probably wandered onto my property by mistake. One older coworker went quiet when I mentioned the tobacco field. He asked me where exactly my house had been. When I told him, his face tightened. and he changed the subject. I did not push. On the next New Year's Eve, I stayed inside again. Lights on, television playing, phone fully charged. I watched the clock carefully, almost afraid of it reaching midnight. When the year changed, nothing happened. No strange sounds, no sudden silence. I laughed at myself, feeling embarrassed for letting fear control me. But later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It said, "Hope you're settled in." That was it. No name, no explanation. I stared at the screen for a long time. I did not reply. I blocked the number. I barely slept. I still think about that night in Kentucky, about how quiet it got, about how calm everything felt, like whatever was there had done this before, like it was not in a hurry. Every New Year's Eve since then, I double-check my doors. I keep the lights on. I stay awake until morning. I tell myself it is just a habit. But when the night grows quiet and the world feels like it is holding its breath, I listen very carefully, because I'm still not sure it ever really left. Story 3. I never planned on telling this story to anyone. For a long time, I tried to explain it away as nerves, cold weather, or too much time alone with my thoughts. But every New Year's Eve since then, when the clock starts creeping toward midnight, I feel that same tight feeling in my chest. So I figured I might as well tell it the way it happened, because it still feels real to me. Too real. This took place in eastern Kentucky a few years back. I was in my late 20s at the time, living alone in a small rental house just outside a town most people have never heard of. It was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where hills press in close, and where the woods start just beyond your back fence. I liked it that way. Quiet, cheap, no traffic, no noise except wind and the occasional dog barking far off. New Year's Eve had always been a low-key thing for me. I was not much for parties. That year, I had worked a half day, picked up some groceries, and planned to stay in. Maybe watch the ball drop on television, maybe fall asleep before midnight like I often did. It had been cold all week, the kind of damp cold that gets into your bones. That evening, a thin layer of snow covered the ground, not enough to look pretty, just enough to make everything feel muted and still. By the time it got dark, the world outside felt empty. No cars passed my house. No fireworks. Not even the usual sound of folks shooting guns in the distance, which was common around holidays. I remember noticing that, but I did not think much of it at the time. Around 8 o'clock, I made myself some food and sat on the couch. The house was small, just one floor, with a living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. The walls were thin, but that night everything felt strangely quiet. Too quiet, if I am being honest. Even the old heater seemed to be running softer than usual. At about 9, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor, an older man named Roy who lived about a quarter mile down the road. He asked if I had heard anything strange outside. I remember staring at the message for a few seconds, unsure how to answer. I typed back that I had not noticed anything, which was mostly true. He replied with a simple, "Okay, just checking." That should have been the end of it. But after that message, I started paying closer attention to the sounds around me, or maybe the lack of them. I muted the television and just listened. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a storm, even though the sky was clear. That was when I heard it for the first time. A faint sound, almost like footsteps in snow, coming from somewhere behind the house. Slow, careful. Then it stopped. I told myself it was an animal. We had plenty of deer, coyotes, and stray dogs in the area. Still, I got up and peeked through the back window. My porch light showed nothing but my empty yard and the tree line beyond it. No movement, no shapes, just snow and shadows. I locked the door anyway. Then I checked the front door too, even though I knew it was already locked. As I walked back to the couch, I felt a strange sense of being watched, but I brushed it off. It was just New Year's Eve nerves, I told myself. I sat back down, but I did not turn the television back on. I kept listening, waiting, wondering why my gut would not let me relax. That was only the beginning. After that first sound outside, I stayed on edge. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it, but my body did not agree. My shoulders stayed tense, and every little creak of the house made my stomach tighten. I finally turned the television back on, but kept the volume low. The voices felt strange in the quiet room, like they did not belong there. Around 10 o'clock, the heater shut off. That might not sound scary, but the sudden absence of that low background noise made the house feel empty in a way I cannot fully explain. I sat there for a minute, waiting for it to come back on. It did not. The cold started to creep in, and I could see my breath when I exhaled slowly. I stood up and walked to the hallway, telling myself I was just going to adjust the thermostat. As I passed the front window, I noticed something that made me stop. There were footprints in the snow near the road. That alone was not strange. People walk along that road sometimes. What bothered me was where they stopped. The marks led from the road straight toward my house, then disappeared near the front porch. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see more, but the darkness beyond the porch light swallowed everything. I remember feeling embarrassed with myself, like I was acting foolish. Still, I checked the locks again, all of them. When I turned away from the door, I heard movement from the back of the house. Not loud, not sudden, just a slow shifting sound, like someone carefully stepping where they knew the ground would not crunch too much. I froze in place, barely breathing. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. I did not look out the back window again. Something in me said not to. Instead, I went into the bedroom and grabbed my phone charger and a flashlight I kept in the nightstand. My phone battery was low, and I remember thinking how stupid it was that I had not charged it earlier. I texted Roy again, asking if he was outside or if he had seen anyone nearby. Several minutes passed with no response. That made the fear settle deeper. Roy was usually quick to reply, even late at night. At around 10:45, the power flickered. The lights dimmed for just a second, then came back. The television restarted on its own, louder than before, making me flinch. I turned it off completely after that. I did not want any noise I could not control. I sat on the couch with the flashlight in my hand, listening. Outside, the world still felt wrong. No distant celebrations, no voices, no music. Just that same careful movement circling the house, never too fast, never too close to the windows. That was when I realized something that made my blood feel cold. Whoever or whatever was out there seemed to know the layout of my place. The movement paused near the bedroom window, then the kitchen, then the back door, like it was checking each spot, one by one. Midnight was getting close. I watched the time on my phone tick forward, each minute feeling heavier than the last. I remember thinking that if I could just make it past midnight, everything would feel normal again. I was very wrong. As the minutes crawled closer to midnight, I stopped checking the time. Watching it made my nerves worse. I kept the phone face down on the couch and focused on breathing slow and quiet. My flashlight stayed on, pointed toward the hallway, even though nothing was there. The beam felt like a small comfort, even if it did not really protect me from anything. The movement outside continued, but it changed. It was not circling anymore. It stayed still for long stretches, then shifted just enough to let me know it had not left. That waiting felt worse than anything else. It was patient, like it had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world. At one point, I heard a low sound coming from the woods behind the house. Not an animal sound, at least not one I recognized. It was soft, drawn out, and ended just as slowly as it began. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I pulled my jacket tighter and told myself again that I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I checked my phone. Still no reply from Roy. I considered calling him, but the idea of making noise felt wrong, like it would draw attention to me in a way I did not want. So I stayed quiet. Just before midnight, something changed in the air. That is the only way I can describe it. The silence became heavier, pressing in from all sides. Even the distant woods felt closer, like the darkness itself was leaning toward the house. Then the movement stopped completely. No shifting, no careful steps, nothing. I waited. My muscles ached from holding so still. Every second felt stretched thin. I started to think maybe it had finally left, that whatever had been outside had decided I was not worth the trouble. That hope lasted about a minute. I heard a slow sound from the porch. Not loud, not sudden, just a steady presence, right on the other side of the door. I could not see it, but I could feel it there, standing, waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I did not move. I did not even blink. The flashlight beam shook slightly in my hand, no matter how hard I tried to steady it. Then, From the other side of the door, I heard breathing. It was calm. Too calm. Like whoever was there was not afraid at all. Like they were listening just as carefully as I was. Tears filled my eyes, not from panic, but from the awful certainty that this was not a random event. This felt planned, thought out, and for the first time that night, I understood that making it past midnight would not mean safety. The clock on my phone buzzed quietly as the date changed. New Year's Day had arrived, and whoever was outside did not leave. When the date changed on my phone, nothing outside celebrated it. No noise, no movement, no sense of relief. The breathing beyond the door stayed slow and steady, like time itself had stopped for whoever was standing there. I stayed frozen on the couch, my legs numb, my hands cold around the flashlight. Minutes passed, maybe more. I honestly do not know. Fear has a way of stretching time until it barely makes sense. I remember thinking that if the door opened, I would not even be able to stand up fast enough to react. That thought alone made me feel sick. Eventually, the breathing faded. Not suddenly, it slowly grew softer, as if whoever it was stepping away on purpose, careful not to make their absence obvious. I did not rush to the door. I did not look out the windows. I stayed right where I was, listening, until the silence returned to something almost normal. Around 1 a.m, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Roy. His message was short and shaky. He asked if I was safe and told me someone had been outside his place too. He said it stayed near his doors for a long time, then left without warning. He was packing up and going to his daughter's house for the night. I wanted to do the same, but my car was parked out front, and the idea of stepping outside felt impossible. So I stayed until sunrise, sitting in that same spot, wrapped in layers, barely moving. Nothing else happened, but that did not make me feel better. When daylight finally came, I walked the property with shaking legs. There were footprints everywhere, around the house, near every window, right up to the doors. They were deep and clear in the snow, but they did not look quite right. The steps were evenly spaced, almost too perfect, like whoever made them never stumbled or shifted their weight. I moved out 2 weeks later. I still live in Kentucky, but not near the woods, and not alone anymore. Every New Year's Eve, I stay inside with the lights on. I do not mute the television. I do not ignore strange feelings. And when midnight comes, I do not feel relief. I just feel grateful when nothing comes looking. Story 4. That year, I was living just outside a small town in eastern Kentucky. My house sat near the edge of a wooded hill with one long gravel driveway that curved out of sight before reaching the road. Neighbors were far enough away that you could not see their porch lights, only the faint glow if the air was clear. It was peaceful most of the time. Too peaceful, maybe. I had planned a quiet New Year's Eve. No parties, no fireworks, just me, a frozen pizza, and an old football game on television. The weather was cold but not snowy, the kind of damp cold that settles into your bones. Around sunset, I stepped outside to take the trash out. The sky was gray and heavy, and the woods behind my house looked darker than usual, like the trees were pressed closer together. I remember pausing for a second, listening. Nothing seemed off. No wind, no animals, no cars, just silence. I went back inside and locked the door without thinking much about it. As the night went on, the town down the road started celebrating. I could hear distant pops from fireworks, muted by the hills. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister, wishing me a happy new year early. I replied and joked about being in bed by midnight. Everything felt normal. Then, sometime after 11, the power went out. That alone was not unusual. Kentucky power lines do not always hold up well in winter. The television shut off, the lights went dark, and the house went quiet in a way that felt sudden and heavy. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, then grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. That was when I heard something outside. At first, it was so faint I thought it was just the house settling. A soft sound, like gravel shifting. I froze, flashlight still off, listening. It happened again, slow, careful, like footsteps, but not rushed. I told myself it was a deer. We had plenty of those. Still, I walked to the front window and peeked through the curtain. My driveway was empty, lit only by moonlight. The trees stood still. Nothing moved. I let out a breath and laughed quietly at myself. Power outage nerves, that was all. I turned the flashlight on and set a few candles around the living room. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer. It sounded like someone walking up the driveway, stopping, then walking again. Not heavy boots, not light either, just steady, patient steps. I checked my phone, no signal. The time read 11:47. I stood there, flashlight in hand, trying to decide if I was being foolish. Part of me wanted to open the door and yell, ask if someone needed help. Another part of me felt a tight, cold feeling in my stomach, telling me to stay exactly where I was. Then came a knock. Not loud, not angry, just a slow, firm knock on the front door, 3 times. I did not move. The knock came again, just as calm as before. No voice, no greeting, just the sound of knuckles on wood. I remember thinking how strange it was that whoever stood outside did not say anything. No hello, no sorry to bother you, just waiting. The clock on my phone changed to 11:49. Outside, something shifted its weight on the porch. That was when I realized the footsteps had stopped right at my door. My mouth went dry. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears rang. The flashlight beam shook in my hand, casting long shadows on the wall. The knock came one more time, slower than before. Then it stopped. I stood there for what felt like a very long time, wondering if I should call out, wondering if I should hide, wondering why my heart was beating so loud in my chest. Somewhere far away, fireworks cracked in the sky, welcoming a new year I suddenly did not feel ready for. That was when I heard something move around the side of my house. When I heard movement along the side of my house, my first thought was that whoever it was had decided to walk around instead of standing at the front. The sound was slow and careful, like shoes brushing against dirt and leaves. It did not feel rushed at all. That somehow made it worse. I stayed still in the living room, holding the flashlight against my chest so the light would not show through the windows. My house is small, just 1 floor, and the walls are thin. I could hear every small sound outside, even the faint crunch of gravel near the backyard. I told myself again that it could be someone lost, maybe a neighbor's friend who took a wrong turn. But who wanders around someone's house on New Year's Eve without saying a word? Who keeps circling instead of calling out? The footsteps stopped near my bedroom window. I felt my stomach drop. That window faces the woods, not the road. There's no reason for anyone to be back there unless they meant to be. I slowly lowered myself onto the couch, trying not to make any noise. My breathing felt too loud, like it could be heard through the walls. Then came the sound of fingers brushing lightly against the outside wall. Not scratching, not banging, just a slow slide, like someone feeling their way along the siding. I pressed my hand over my mouth without even thinking about it. I could picture it too clearly. Someone standing inches from my window, leaning close, listening the same way I was. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, and I almost dropped it. A text finally came through, delayed. It was from my sister again, saying, "Happy New Year, you still awake?" I did not answer. I could not bring myself to move my fingers. I was too focused on the sound outside, which had stopped again. The silence felt thick, like the air before a storm. After a minute or so, I heard steps moving away from the window. They traveled slowly toward the back door. My back door leads straight into the kitchen, and I had not bothered to check the lock earlier. That thought hit me hard, and my chest tightened. I quietly stood up and walked toward the kitchen, keeping my steps as soft as possible. The flashlight beam stayed low, pointed at the floor. When I reached the door, I checked the handle. It was locked. I let out a small breath of relief. That relief did not last long. There was a gentle pressure against the door from the other side, like someone testing it. Not forcing it, just trying to see if it would give. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I stepped back, gripping the flashlight like it could somehow protect me. The pressure stopped. Everything went quiet again. I waited. Seconds passed, then minutes. No sound at all. The house felt empty and exposed, like it was holding its breath with me. Outside, fireworks grew louder as midnight got closer, bright flashes lighting up the sky beyond the trees. The contrast felt unreal, like the world was celebrating while I stood frozen in fear. I checked the time again. 11:58. That was when I noticed something else. A faint shape blocking part of the light coming through the kitchen window. Someone was standing there, close enough that I could see the outline of shoulders and a head. They were not moving. Just standing, facing the glass. I could not see a face, only a dark shape, perfectly still. Midnight arrived with distant cheers and explosions of color in the sky. At the exact same moment, the shape outside leaned closer to the window, as if listening to me breathe. And that was when I heard the sound of the back door handle slowly turning. The handle stopped moving before it fully turned. Whoever was outside did not rush. That was the part that made my fear settle deep instead of spiking all at once. It felt planned, like they had all the time in the world and knew I was trapped inside. I took a slow step back, then another, until my shoulders touched the hallway wall. The flashlight felt slippery in my hand from sweat. I did not turn it off, but I angled it downward so the light would not give away where I stood. The shape outside the window stayed there for a few more seconds. Then it moved away. I heard steps again, slow and steady, heading back toward the front of the house. My mind raced, trying to understand what they wanted. If they wanted to break in, why not try harder? If they wanted help, why stay silent? I stayed frozen until the sounds stopped completely. The power suddenly came back on, with a low hum. Lights flickered on, the heater kicked in. The normal sounds of the house returned like nothing strange had ever happened. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I imagined everything. Then I saw the front porch light come on. I had not turned it on. I walked toward the front window, moving carefully, staying off to the side. I peeked out just enough to see the porch. It was empty. No person. No movement. Just my porch light shining over the gravel and the first curve of the driveway. I checked the door. Still locked. I stood there for a long time, listening. The woods were quiet again. Fireworks faded as the new year settled in. Eventually, I sat back down on the couch, telling myself it was over. Maybe someone really was lost and moved on. Maybe the darkness had played tricks on me. Around 1 in the morning, I finally felt tired enough to sleep. I left all the lights on and went to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound the house made. That was when I heard footsteps again. This time, they were not outside. They were inside the house. The sound came from the living room, slow and deliberate, like someone walking carefully across the floor. My heart dropped into my stomach. I held my breath, straining to hear more. A floorboard creaked. I was not alone. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and tried to call for help. No signal again. I sat up slowly, watching my bedroom door. The handle did not move, but I could feel someone standing on the other side. I do not know how I knew, I just did. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. No voice, no rush, just waiting. I sat there, barely breathing, wondering if the door would open, wondering if this was how my new year would end. Minutes passed like hours. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps moved away, heading toward the front door. I heard the front door open and close. Silence followed. When the sun finally came up, I checked the house. Nothing was missing. No damage, no signs of forced entry. Except for one thing. On the inside of the front door, there was a muddy handprint at shoulder height, like someone had leaned there for a long time. I moved out 2 weeks later. I did not sleep at all after that night. When morning came, the sky was pale and quiet, and the woods looked normal again, like they had nothing to hide. Still, I did not feel safe. I kept replaying every moment in my head, trying to make sense of it in a logical way. I called my sister as soon as I had service again and told her everything. She thought maybe someone drunk had wandered up from town after celebrating. That explanation made sense on the surface, but it did not explain the silence, the patience, or how someone got inside without breaking anything. Later that day, I spoke to a neighbor who lives farther down the road. He told me something that made my skin feel cold. He said a man had been seen walking along the highway late that night, alone, heading toward the woods. No coat, no car nearby, just walking, even though it was freezing. I stayed at a friend's place for the next few nights. When I went back to pack my things, the house felt different, empty in a way that felt watched. I found more marks I had not noticed before. Faint dirt smears near the back door. A slight dent in the soft ground beneath the bedroom window, like someone had stood there for a while. What bothered me most was that nothing ever went missing. Whoever came inside did not take anything. They did not damage anything either. It felt like they were not there to steal. They were there to see me, to be close. That thought still makes my chest feel tight. I moved out of that house before the month ended. I live in a busier area now, with street lights and neighbors close enough to hear each other. I still lock my doors out of habit, and I always check my windows before bed. Every New Year's Eve, when the clock gets close to midnight, I remember that night in Kentucky. I remember standing in the dark, listening to someone move around my home while the rest of the world celebrated. I remember how calm it all felt, like whatever it was had done this before. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door. Sometimes I wonder if they come back to that house every year, waiting for someone else to be alone when the new year begins. I do not go back there. I do not drive down that road anymore, and I will never spend another New Year's Eve in the quiet Kentucky woods. That night taught me something important. Silence can be louder than any celebration, and not everything that waits in the dark wants to be seen. Story 5. This happened on New Year's Eve just a few years ago. I was living alone at the time, renting a small house just outside a tiny town in eastern Kentucky. It was one of those places where the woods start right behind your backyard and the road in front of the house only sees a few cars a night. I liked it that way. It was quiet and rent was cheap. I did not have any big plans for New Year's Eve. My family lives a couple of hours away, and my friends were either working or out of town. I decided to stay home, order some food, and watch the ball drop on television. It felt like a calm way to end the year. That day had been cold, but not snowy. The sky stayed gray from morning until night, and the air felt heavy, like it was holding something back. I remember stepping outside around 4 in the afternoon to take out the trash. The woods behind my house were completely still. No wind, no birds, nothing. I told myself it was just winter doing what winter does. By the time it got dark, I had already locked my doors. That was just a habit I picked up living out there. Around 6, I ordered pizza from the only place that delivered to my area. The driver took longer than usual, but I did not think much of it. When he finally showed up, he seemed nervous. He kept looking past me toward the trees. "Everything all right?" I asked him, trying to be polite. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just ready to be done for the night." That was it. He handed me the food, wished me a happy new year, and left quickly. I remember watching his car lights disappear down the road. I had this odd feeling then, like I should not stay alone that night. I brushed it off and went back inside. As the evening went on, I noticed small things that felt off, but not enough to scare me. My phone signal kept dropping, even though it usually worked fine. The television lost sound for a few seconds at a time. Around 8, I heard what I thought was someone walking outside, but when I looked through the window, there was no one there, just darkness and trees. I tried to relax. I told myself I was letting the quiet get to me. Living alone can do that. I turned on more lights and put on a movie for background noise. Still, I kept checking the clock. Time felt slow, like it was dragging its feet toward midnight. At about 10:30, I heard a knock at the door. It was not loud or aggressive, just 3 soft knocks, calm, almost polite. No one ever came to my house that late, especially not on New Year's Eve. My heart started beating faster, but I did not panic. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. I could not see anyone. The porch light was on, and the yard was empty. I waited a moment, then heard the knock again. Same pattern, same gentle sound. "Hello," I called through the door. There was no answer. I told myself it might be a neighbor needing help, even though my closest neighbor lived far enough away that you would need a car to get there. I unlocked the door but did not open it. I spoke again, louder this time. "Is someone there?" That was when I heard movement. Not on the porch, but to the side of the house. Slow footsteps, crunching lightly on frozen ground. Whoever it was did not speak. They did not run. They just walked, unbothered. I locked the door again and stepped back. I felt silly for being scared, but something about the quiet movement made my skin crawl. I checked all my windows, making sure the locks were secure. Everything looked fine. When I sat back down, I noticed it was completely silent again. No footsteps, no wind, just my own breathing and the low hum of the heater. I told myself it was probably kids messing around, even though deep down I knew that explanation did not fit. As the clock moved closer to midnight, I felt this growing sense of unease, like something was waiting for the year to end. That is when I heard the knock for the third time, this time coming from the back of the house. When I realized the sound was coming from the back of the house, my stomach tightened. I stayed where I was for a moment, just listening. I did not hear anything else. No voice, no movement. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, which had a small window facing the backyard. I did not turn on the light. I leaned forward and pulled the curtain back just enough to see outside. The yard was empty. The trees stood close together, their bare branches reaching into the dark sky. The porch light in the back was on, but it did not help much. Shadows filled every corner. I stood there longer than I meant to, hoping to see someone step into view so I could laugh at myself. Nothing happened. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the window. That was when I noticed the back door handle was moving slightly. Not fast, not aggressive, just a small, careful motion like someone was testing it to see if it would give. My heart started racing. I knew I had locked that door earlier. I remembered the sound of the lock turning. Still, I checked it anyway. It was locked. I stepped back again, trying to calm myself down. My thoughts went straight to the worst possible places, but I forced myself to think clearly. If someone wanted to break in, they would not be this patient. They would not be this quiet. That idea did not make me feel better. It made me feel worse. I picked up my phone and tried to call my brother. The call did not go through. No signal. I tried again. Same result. I opened my messages, but they would not send. It was like my phone had suddenly decided it did not want to connect to the outside world anymore. I moved to the living room and sat down, keeping my eyes on the hallway that led to the back door. Every sound the house made felt louder than it should have been. The heater clicked on and off. The floor creaked as it settled. Each little noise made me tense up. A few minutes passed, maybe 10. Nothing happened. I started to feel embarrassed about how scared I was. I even stood up and walked back to the kitchen, thinking I would look outside again, just to prove to myself that no one was there. As I reached the window, I saw something that made me freeze. There were footprints in the yard. They were fresh, pressed into the thin layer of frost that covered the ground. They came from the woods and stopped a few feet from the back door. What bothered me most was that they did not go back the way they came. They just ended there, like whoever made them had simply disappeared. I stared at them for a long time, trying to understand what I was seeing. The shape of the prints looked wrong, too long, too narrow. They did not look like normal boots, but I could not explain why. I only knew they made my chest feel tight. I backed away from the window and locked myself in the bathroom for a moment, just to breathe. I felt foolish hiding in there, but it was the only room without windows. I told myself I would wait it out. Midnight was coming soon. Maybe whoever it was would leave after that. When I checked the time, it was 11:48. As if on purpose, the lights flickered. They did not go out completely, but they dimmed enough to make the room feel smaller. I heard movement again, this time closer. It sounded like slow steps moving along the side of the house, stopping near each window, one by one. Whoever was outside was taking their time. I realized then that this was not random. This was not someone lost or confused. It felt planned, like they were waiting for something specific. I whispered to myself that everything would be fine once the new year started. I do not know why I believed that, but I held on to it. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, watching the clock on my phone tick closer to midnight. When the time changed, the house went completely silent. No heater, no outside sounds, nothing at all. And then I heard a voice, low and calm, coming from right outside the back door. It said my name. Hearing my name like that made my whole body go cold. It was not shouted. It was not whispered either. It sounded normal, like someone standing a few feet away, speaking in a calm and friendly tone. That somehow made it worse. It felt personal, like whoever was outside knew me. I did not answer. I could not make myself move. I sat there on the bathroom floor, staring at the door, listening as hard as I could. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the voice spoke again. "Hey, I just want to talk." It sounded like a man, but not anyone I recognized. There was no emotion in it, no anger, no fear, just steady and patient. My mind raced, trying to think of how someone could know my name. I rarely had visitors. I did not talk to my neighbors much. I kept to myself. I slowly stood up and crept toward the bathroom door. I opened it just enough to look down the hallway. Everything looked the same as it always did. Lights on, furniture untouched, safe, at least on the inside. The voice came again, closer this time, like the person had leaned toward the door. "You do not have to be scared. You invited me." That made my stomach drop. I knew I had not invited anyone. I had not spoken to anyone all evening except the delivery driver. I said nothing back. I stayed quiet, hoping the person would give up and leave. Instead, I heard movement again, slow and deliberate, circling the house. It stopped near the living room window. I heard breathing then, not loud, but close enough that it felt wrong. I realized with horror that whoever this was had their face right up against the glass. I turned off the living room lights from the hallway, hoping to make it harder for them to see inside. The house fell into shadow, lit only by the television screen and a small lamp in the corner. I held my breath. The breathing stopped. A few seconds passed, then the voice spoke again, this time right outside the window. "It is a new year now," it said. "That means doors are open." I do not know why, but that sentence made me feel like crying. It sounded like something rehearsed, something said many times before. I finally found my voice, though it shook when I spoke. "Please leave," I said. "I do not want any trouble." There was a pause, long enough that I started to hope it worked. Then the voice replied, softer now. "I am already here." The lights flickered again, stronger this time. The television screen went black. The house felt colder, like the heat had stopped working. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. My thoughts were scattered. I considered running to my car, but I would have to pass too many windows, too many doors. I looked at the front door from where I stood. It was still closed, still locked, but something about it felt wrong, like it was no longer enough to keep whatever was outside from coming in. I heard movement at the back of the house again, followed by a slow, steady pressure against the door. Not forceful, just firm, like someone leaning their weight into it, testing how much it could take. The door held, but the sound of it strained against the frame made my hands shake. I grabbed the only thing I could find nearby, a heavy flashlight, and held it like it could protect me. I kept my eyes on the hallway, waiting for something to happen, not knowing what I would do if it did. The pressure stopped. Everything went quiet again. Minutes passed, maybe longer. I do not know. Time felt stretched and unreal. I started to wonder if I imagined everything. Maybe stress had gotten to me. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The back door was no longer closed. It was open just a few inches, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had locked it. Seeing the back door like that made my legs feel weak. I stood there, staring at the narrow gap, expecting it to move more at any second. Cold air drifted into the house, carrying the smell of wet leaves and dirt from the woods. The house did not feel like mine anymore. It felt shared. I told myself I had to act. Standing still was only making it worse. I took a slow step forward, then another, keeping the flashlight aimed at the hallway. The beam shook in my hand. With each step, my heart beat harder in my chest. I listened for breathing, for footsteps, for any sign that I was not alone. When I reached the kitchen, I could see the door clearly. It was open just enough to show darkness beyond it. I swallowed and spoke, trying to sound calm. "Who are you?" I asked. There was no answer. I moved closer and pushed the door shut. It closed easily, like it had never been resisted at all. I turned the lock and leaned my weight against it for a moment, just to be sure. The silence that followed felt thick and uncomfortable. That was when I noticed something on the floor. Mud. Fresh, dark streaks leading from the back door into the kitchen. They continued down the hallway, stopping right in front of the bathroom, right where I had been hiding earlier. My mouth went dry. Whatever had come inside had already been close to me. Too close. I followed the marks slowly, my skin crawling. They did not look like normal footprints anymore. They were stretched, uneven, like something heavy had dragged itself rather than walked. I felt sick just looking at them. I heard a soft sound behind me, like fabric brushing against the wall. I spun around, flashlight raised, but the kitchen was empty. Still, I knew I was not alone. The air felt different, thick and cold, like something unseen was standing right beside me. Then I felt it, a pressure near my ear, like someone leaning in to speak. I froze. I could not turn. I could not breathe. "Thank you for letting me in," the voice said, quiet and pleased. The flashlight slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The lights came back on all at once, bright and normal, like nothing had ever been wrong. The heater started up again. The house felt warm. I stood there alone. The mud was gone. The door was closed and locked. No footprints outside, no sign of anyone ever being there. My phone buzzed with missed messages, all coming in at once. The time read 12:20. I did not sleep in that house again. I packed a bag and drove straight to my brother's place, shaking the entire way. I told him someone tried to break in, but I did not tell him everything. I knew how it would sound. I moved out a week later. Sometimes, when New Year's Eve comes around, I think about that voice, about the way it spoke like it belonged there. I still live in Kentucky. I still hear stories. Now I listen. And every year when the clock gets close to midnight, I make sure every door is locked. Story 6. I want to start by saying this really happened to me, and I still think about it every New Year's Eve. This took place in Kentucky a few years back when I was living alone in a small rental house just outside a quiet town. Nothing fancy, just one floor, old wooden walls, and fields stretching behind it. The kind of place where nights feel longer than they should. New Year's Eve that year felt strange from the start. The day was cold but not snowy. The sky stayed gray the whole afternoon, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to do. I remember thinking it didn't feel festive at all. No excitement, no energy, just quiet. Most people around there went to family gatherings or drove into town for small parties. I decided to stay home. I told myself I was tired and just wanted a calm night. I bought some food earlier that day, grabbed a few drinks, and planned to watch television until midnight. Simple plan. By the time it got dark, the area around my house was completely still. No cars, no voices, just wind moving slowly through dry grass outside. That was normal for where I lived, but that night the silence felt heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. Around 8 in the evening, I noticed my phone signal was weak. That happened sometimes, so I didn't think much of it. The internet was slow too. Videos took forever to load. I remember laughing and saying out loud, "Of course this happens on New Year's Eve." I was trying to keep things light. As the hours passed, I kept checking the time more than usual. Not because I was excited for midnight, but because something felt off. I couldn't explain it clearly. I just felt watched, even though I knew that didn't make sense. The windows were covered by thin curtains and the doors were locked. Everything was normal. At around 10, I went to the kitchen to heat up some food. While I stood there waiting, I noticed how quiet the house sounded. No small noises, no pipes, no distant sounds from outside, just my own breathing and the low hum of the refrigerator. It felt too quiet for a night when everyone else was celebrating. I tried to distract myself by turning the television volume up a little. That helped, but only for a few minutes. I kept catching myself listening between sounds, like I was waiting for something else to happen. Then I noticed something small but strange. The clock on my wall was a few minutes behind my phone, which was normal, but it seemed to stop for a moment. I stared at it longer than I should have. The second hand moved again, but my stomach tightened for no clear reason. I told myself I was just tired, maybe lonely, maybe overthinking things. Still, I double-checked the locks on the front and back doors. I didn't usually do that twice, but that night I did. When I sat back down, I realized I had stopped enjoying the night entirely. Midnight felt far away, and I had this growing feeling that I didn't want to be alone when the year changed. That was when I heard something that made me sit up straight, not from fear yet, but from confusion. It was subtle, easy to ignore, but it didn't belong there. It sounded like movement outside, somewhere behind the house, slow and careful. At first I told myself it was just an animal. That made the most sense. There were deer, stray dogs, and all kinds of wildlife around that area. Still, I stayed very still on the couch, listening. Whatever it was didn't sound rushed. It moved slowly, like it had all the time in the world. I muted the television. The silence came back immediately, thick and uncomfortable. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, steady but louder than before. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to focus. The sound came again. This time, it was closer to the back of the house, near the kitchen side. Not loud, just the sound of something shifting through dry ground and grass. It stopped, then started again, like it was deciding where to go. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen window. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to be seen, even though I felt silly thinking that way. I pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside. There was nothing there. Just darkness and the faint outline of the field behind my house. No movement. No shapes. The wind wasn't strong enough to explain the sound either. I let the curtain fall back into place and stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to breathe slowly and stepped away from the window. I told myself I was imagining things. Being alone on a night like that can mess with your head. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out weak. When I returned to the living room, I noticed my phone again. Still barely any signal. Messages weren't going through. The time now said a little past 11, less than an hour until the new year. I sat back down, but I didn't relax. I kept glancing toward the hallway and the back door. Every small sound inside the house felt louder than it should have. The floor made its usual soft noises as the temperature dropped, but even that made me tense. Then I heard the movement again. This time, it wasn't behind the house. It sounded like it was closer to the side wall near my bedroom window. Slow, careful, like someone didn't want to be noticed. My stomach dropped. I stood up again, my hands slightly shaking now. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but my phone wasn't cooperating. I walked quietly toward the bedroom and stood by the door, listening. Nothing. I told myself to stop, to calm down. But the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore had settled deep inside me, and it refused to leave. That's when I noticed something that truly scared me. The feeling wasn't just outside anymore. It felt closer, too close, like whatever was out there knew I was awake. I stayed near the bedroom doorway, standing still like that might somehow make me invisible. The house felt different now, not darker, not colder, just unfamiliar, like it wasn't fully mine anymore. I kept listening, trying to catch any small detail that would explain what was happening, but the silence kept returning in short, heavy waves. I slowly walked back to the living room, making sure my steps were light. I didn't want to announce where I was. I know that sounds dramatic, but at that moment it felt like common sense. My instincts were louder than my thoughts. I checked the back door again. Still locked. The handle didn't move. Everything looked normal, which somehow made things worse. If something was wrong, I wanted proof. Something clear. Instead, I had nothing but this deep sense of being observed. I sat back down on the couch, but stayed upright. No leaning back, no relaxing. The television was still muted, frozen on some random channel. The bright colors looked wrong in the quiet room. I turned it off completely. That's when I realized the outside noise hadn't returned for a while. No movement, no signs of anything at all. It was like whatever had been there had simply stopped. I checked the time again. 11:47. 13 minutes until the new year. Normally I would be counting down, maybe texting someone, maybe opening another drink. Instead, I felt dread building in my chest. I didn't want midnight to come. I stood and walked toward the front window. I don't know why. Something pulled me there. I moved the curtain just a little and looked out toward the road. There was a shape standing near the edge of my yard. Not close to the house, but close enough to notice. It didn't move. It didn't wave or step forward. It just stood there, tall and dark against the lighter ground. I couldn't see details. No clear face, no clear clothes, just the outline of a person, perfectly still. I froze. My mind raced through explanations. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe someone lost. But no one stood like that, in the cold, on New Year's Eve, doing nothing. The shape didn't move, but I had the strongest feeling that it was aware of me. Like it knew exactly where I was standing inside the house. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away, my legs feeling weak. I wanted to leave, get in my car and drive anywhere else, but the thought of unlocking the door and stepping outside felt impossible, like crossing a line I wouldn't be able to come back from. The clock in the living room started ticking louder, each second dragging itself forward. I stood there staring at the dark hallway, wondering what would happen when the year finally changed. And then, just a few seconds before midnight, I heard something inside the house that confirmed my worst fear. Whatever had been outside wasn't outside anymore. I felt my whole body tense up. The sound was faint, but it came from inside the house, somewhere down the hallway. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was subtle, like slow movement where there shouldn't have been any. The kind of sound you notice only when you are already scared. I stood frozen in the living room, staring toward the dark hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. I didn't want to move. I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard across the house. The clock hit midnight. Fireworks started going off far away in town. Distant cheers carried faintly through the air. The new year had arrived, and it felt wrong, like it had come at the worst possible moment. The noise inside the house stopped. That silence was worse than anything else. It felt deliberate, like something had noticed the outside sounds and chosen to wait. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. Still no signal, no messages, no help. I whispered hello, not loudly, just enough to hear my own voice. It sounded weak and small in the empty room. No response came back, but the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger. It felt like someone was standing just out of sight, listening. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time didn't feel normal anymore. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my keys from the table, keeping my eyes on the hallway the entire time. Another soft movement came from deeper inside the house, closer now. I didn't wait anymore. I unlocked the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I ran to my car and got inside as fast as I could. When the engine started, I felt a small wave of relief, but it didn't last. As the headlights came on, they lit up my front yard. The shape was gone. I drove straight to town and stayed there until morning, sitting in a parking lot with the doors locked. When I finally went back after sunrise, the house looked normal. No signs of anyone inside. No damage. Nothing out of place. I moved out a week later. Every New Year's Eve since then, when the clock gets close to midnight, I remember that feeling, that sense of being watched, of something waiting. I still don't know who or what was there with me that night in Kentucky. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. Story 7. New Year's Eve in Kentucky is usually quiet where I live. I'm not talking about the city with fireworks and loud bars. I mean the kind of place where the road has more trees than streetlights, and midnight mostly sounds like wind moving through bare branches. That year I decided to spend New Year's Eve alone. No party, no countdown on television, just me, my old farmhouse, and a simple plan to cook dinner and sleep early. The house sits a few miles outside a small town. It used to belong to my uncle, and when he passed, I moved in to take care of it. The place is old but solid. Wood floors that complain when you walk, walls that hold cold air in winter, and windows that never fully block the outside sounds. I had lived there for months without trouble, so I felt comfortable being alone. That evening, the sky went dark earlier than usual. Heavy clouds rolled in, and the air felt thick, like snow might come but never quite decided to. Around 7, I finished eating and cleaned the dishes. I remember checking my phone and seeing messages from friends wishing me a happy new year already. I replied politely, said I was tired, and put the phone face down on the table. That was when I noticed how quiet the house felt. Not peaceful quiet, just empty. Usually I could hear something, wind, an animal far away, maybe a car passing on the main road. But that night, it felt like the sound had been turned off. I stood still in the kitchen, listening. My ears almost hurt from how silent it was. I told myself I was overthinking it. Winter nights can be like that. I turned on the living room lamp and sat on the couch with a blanket. The television stayed off. I did not feel like watching anything. I just stared at the window across the room. Outside was nothing but darkness and the faint shape of trees. Around 10, I started to feel uneasy, and I could not explain why. It was not fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you realize you forgot something important but cannot remember what it was. I checked the doors, even though I knew they were locked. Front door, back door, then the side door that leads to the old storage room. All locked. When I walked back to the living room, I noticed the air felt colder. I checked the heater. It was running fine. Still, The cold felt different, like it was coming from inside the house rather than outside. I sat back down, pulled the blanket tighter, and tried to relax. Midnight was still 2 hours away. I remember thinking that once the new year arrived, I would feel better, like crossing that line would somehow reset everything. Then I heard it. Not a loud sound, not sudden, just a soft, slow movement somewhere above me. I froze on the couch. The house has an attic, but nobody ever goes up there. I told myself it was probably wood reacting to the cold. Old houses make sounds all the time. Still, I did not move for a long time. I listened carefully, holding my breath without realizing it. The sound stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I checked the time, 10:47 p.m. That was the moment I realized I did not want to be alone anymore. I stayed on the couch longer than I should have. My body felt stiff, like if I moved too fast, something bad might happen. I kept listening, hoping to hear the normal sounds come back. Wind, a distant car, anything. But the quiet stayed in place, pressing against the walls. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up. I told myself I was acting childish. It was just a house on a winter night, nothing more. I walked to the kitchen to get some water. The light over the sink felt too bright, and for some reason, it made the rest of the house look darker by comparison. While filling the glass, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly. That bothered me more than the sounds had. I am not a nervous person. I have spent nights alone before, even in worse places. This felt different, like my body knew something my mind was still refusing to accept. As I drank the water, I heard movement again. This time it was not above me. It came from the far end of the house, near the storage room. It was slow and uneven, like weight shifting from one side to another. I stood there, staring at the hallway, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. I whispered hello without thinking. My voice sounded weak in the open space. There was no answer. The feeling in my chest tightened. I did not hear movement after that, but the sense that I was not alone became stronger. I could almost feel a tension, like something was aware of me standing there, listening back. I walked down the hallway, turning on lights as I went. Each room looked normal. Bedroom untouched, bathroom empty. The storage room door was closed, just like I left it. I placed my hand on the door handle and paused. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. I opened the door. The room was exactly the same. Boxes stacked against the wall, old tools on shelves, nothing out of place. I felt a wave of relief that made my knees weak. I shut the door and laughed quietly at myself, embarrassed by how scared I had become. But as I turned back toward the hallway, I noticed something small that made my stomach drop. The temperature changed again. The hallway felt colder than the storage room, colder than the rest of the house. The air felt heavy, thick, like breathing through damp fabric. My breath started to show faintly, even though the heater was still running. I walked back to the living room quickly and sat down. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 11:28 p.m. Almost midnight. I thought about calling someone, but I did not know what I would say. There was no clear problem, no emergency, just fear growing quietly without a clear reason. Then my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It said, "You should not be awake tonight." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I checked the number again. No name, no photo, just a local area code. I typed a response, asking who it was, but before I could send it, another message appeared. It gets closer when you pay attention. That was when I realized the silence was gone. The house was no longer quiet. Something was moving again, slowly, patiently, from room to room. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to decide if this was some kind of cruel joke. My friends knew where I lived, but none of them would do something like this. The message felt too personal, too calm, like it was not trying to scare me, just stating a fact. I locked the phone and placed it face down on the table. I did not want to see it light up again. My ears focused on the house instead. I could hear slow movement now, not loud, but clear enough to follow. It was not rushing. It sounded careful, like whoever or whatever it was knew the layout better than I did. The sound moved from the back of the house toward the hallway. I stood up and backed myself into a corner of the living room. I picked up the fireplace poker and held it with both hands, feeling foolish but safer having something solid. I told myself that if someone had broken in, I would hear something obvious. A door opening, a a window giving way. But there had been nothing like that. The house had simply changed around me. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Each second felt louder than the last. I watched the hallway, waiting for something to appear, but nothing did. Still, the feeling of being watched became stronger. It felt like someone was standing just out of sight, close enough to know I was there. My phone buzzed again on the table. I did not want to look, but I knew I had to. With shaking hands, I picked it up. A new message appeared. Almost time. I checked the clock. 11:57 p.m. My chest felt tight, and my breathing became shallow. I tried to think clearly. I told myself I needed to leave. Go to the car. Drive somewhere with lights and people, anywhere else. I moved toward the front door, every step slow and careful. Halfway there, the temperature dropped sharply. It felt like stepping into a cold basement. The air pressed against my skin, and my breath came out in visible clouds now. I stopped moving, afraid to go forward, afraid to turn back. The hallway light flickered once and went dim. I felt it then. Not a touch, not a sound, just a presence directly behind me, close enough that I could sense its shape without seeing it. My body locked up, every instinct screaming not to move. A voice spoke, low and steady, right near my ear. It stayed with the house, now it stays with you. The clock began the final countdown to midnight. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the poker so hard my hands hurt. When the last second passed, the lights went out completely. The house fell into total darkness. When the lights went out, I expected panic to take over. Instead, everything went strangely calm. The cold was still there, but the movement stopped. The house felt empty again, like whatever had been sharing the space with me had stepped back. I opened my eyes slowly. The darkness was complete, but I could still make out shapes as my vision adjusted. The hallway stretched ahead of me, silent and still. I did not feel that presence behind me anymore. That scared me more than when it was close. My phone lit up in my hand, 12:01 a.m. No new message, no signal either, just the time. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The house began to sound normal again. The heater kicked in, the wind brushed against the walls outside. The familiar complaints of old wood returned, slow and harmless. It felt like waking up from a bad dream, except my body still felt tense, like it was waiting for something else to happen. I forced myself to move. I turned on my phone flashlight and walked through the house one room at a time. Everything looked the same. Doors closed, windows locked, no signs that anyone had been there. The storage room was untouched. The attic door was shut and covered in dust, just like always. Still, I did not sleep. I stayed in the living room until morning, lights on, sitting upright on the couch. When the sky finally began to lighten, I felt some of the fear drain away. Daylight has a way of making everything feel manageable. Around 8 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a regular text from a friend, asking how my quiet New Year's Eve went. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I told them it was strange, but fine. I did not mention anything else. Before setting the phone down, I checked the unknown number. It was gone. No message history, no contact, just empty space where those words had been. I still live in that house. I have never heard movement like that again, and I have never received another message. But every New Year's Eve, no matter where I am, I wake up just after midnight feeling cold, like something has remembered me. And I always make sure I am not alone.